Hello, hello, hello. This is Dr. Troy.
And I'm Benjamin Toy.
We're broadcasting from the Cohesion Culture headquarters in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina, where even when it rains, the sun still shines.
You're going to hear real-time stories from leaders confessing their most crucial or recent experiences in business.
Learn what their cost them, steps they took to fix it, and how they planned
to not do that one again.
All right, cohesive leaders. I am joined in this the recording studio today with Regina Huber. She spends her time between the U.S. and France, currently in France. So excited to have international guests again. We are an international podcast, so that's exciting. So welcome, Regina.
Ben, I am so delighted to be here. And yes, it's indeed international, because when people ask me where I'm from, I sometimes don't even know what to say because I've lived in many places, and I'm sure some other guests that you have had on as well, and many of our listeners.
Awesome. All right. Well, we start off in the same way. We want our audience to know something about you that would not be found on your resume, your CV, your LinkedIn profile, your About Us on your website. So tell us a hobby, an interest, something unique about you.
Yes, I love to dance, and I know that in itself is not so unique, but I have picked up lots of different dances as I've moved around in the world. And currently, what I most enjoy dancing is Ndombolo, which is from Congo, as well as Sabar, which is from Senegal, and in between also some Kizomba Semba from Angola. So yeah, in addition to many other dances that I have picked up along the way. Mm-hmm.
And so you learn these different dances, and you can keep them separate, and they don't, or do you blend them together when you're doing it?
Oh no, I don't blend them together. I mean, there's sometimes a few elements maybe that come into for example, when I used to dance Samba de Gafieira, some people also danced Argentine tango, and I did too in the past. So you would mix in maybe a few little elements, but otherwise it's just really different rhythms. And, that doesn't always allow for it.
Awesome. All right. So next thing is we want to know about you as a person. We want to know identity. We want to talk about character traits that either you describe yourself as, you aspire to be described as, or others would just say about you, whether you're in the room or not, hopefully. And so we're not going to talk about roles or hats or profession here, right? So I want to know who you are as a person.
First of all, adventurous, freedom-loving, eclectic, I believe. And yes, and very curious, absolutely curious. I always have been that, and that's probably also what pushed me out into the world and made me explore.
So how would friends describe you as curious? What would they have seen you do that would give that definition for you?
I ask a lot of questions. I do lots of research about what is really going on in the world. I know that's hard to distinguish these days anyway, but I like to look into many different sources in order to then, with discernment, figure it out for myself. And of course, yes, I have traveled a lot. I have had some adventures in some places such as Johannesburg or Rio de Janeiro, where I lived in the past as well, and other places that not a lot of people have experienced, for sure.
So how many countries have you lived in?
I have lived in 6 countries and
Wow.
3 continents. And and I've also worked quite a lot in Portugal, where I never lived, but traveled to for years, weekly.
Yeah. So how many countries have you been able to visit?
I don't know exactly at this time. Definitely, 40s, 50s.
Awesome.
So,
Well, travel is a topic that we have on the conversation because folks love to share that part and more the country. So I love getting to know that, and I'm an avid traveler. So is Dr. Troy, who cannot be here today. All right. So now let's know about your roles, hats you've worn, You can talk about your career trajectory that's got you where you're this point, but just let us know about the things that you've done, accolades, things like that.
Okay. So I was promoted into a leadership role at age 27 when I had just moved to Spain 10 months earlier. I'd learned the language. That was quite surprising because I didn't have any relevant background or studies or whatsoever. So it came as a total like plunge into the cold water. But I took the challenge and it worked out just fine.
What type of company was that one?
It was a Boston Consulting Group, so a global consulting firm. I had worked for that company in Munich for a couple of years before moving to Spain, and trying out something different. And then I stayed in Spain 7 years, and from there I moved to Brazil short term because I helped BCG open an office there after I'd already helped them open an office in Portugal. This is why I said earlier I was traveling to Lisbon actually weekly for several years, right? And I learned Portuguese this way, European Portuguese first, and then it got mixed up with Brazilian Portuguese, which is quite different. So yeah, I was in Sao Paulo, and then this was a half-year assignment, and then I moved back to Germany actually for a couple of years, did some European projects with BCG. I left BCG to work with a BCG alum in Argentina for a startup. And then the Argentine crisis hit, so there was no more work for me. Well, work there was, but they wouldn't have been able to pay me for that.
Right. You can work all you want. Yeah.
Right. And then I also spent another couple of months in Brazil as part of that. And then, BCG hired me back for their San Francisco office. And that's how I got my green card and, my work permit in the US, and how I moved to the US for the very first time. After 3.5 years, I decided to move back to Argentina and open a bed and breakfast. And that was my first brick and mortar business. That went actually great. And then I got a little tired of the always having to be home so much for my guests, although I enjoyed the rest of it very much. I also had to deal with corrupt authorities, but that also,
Yeah.
happened in other places too. So anyway, but I moved to actually this time Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and I also opened another brick and mortar business, but that time it didn't really go so well because so that's how eventually, and I can tell you more about that story if that's of interest later, but eventually then I moved to New York City at the beginning of 2012. And that's how I started thinking about my current business, Transform Your Performance. And that's how this coaching, speaking, and training business was eventually born.
Wow. So many things there. What a life of change and variety. Now you said back to Germany. So are you German?
I'm German, yeah. I lived
Okay.
in until age 26.
Okay. Ich war Austauschschüler beim Würzburg.
Ja, wirklich.
So yeah. So I was an exchange student in a southern town in Germany. So high school into college. So anyways, I was like, you said France originally, but I'm not detecting the French accent there. So
No,
it's
no,
good.
not at all. Yeah. I'm actually also from southern Germany, so closer to Salzburg.
Okay,
Munich.
well, I when I was an exchange student, I did the slides. I've been to Mozart's Geburtshaus, so
Mhm.
um, pronunciation's bad there, but I'm excited. Okay, so you've done a lot. So what is the that you are prepared to share that you learned something from? So let's paint the picture of what it was, and then I'm going to ask questions later about the fixing, the solving, things like that. But paint us the picture of what you messed up.
Okay. Yeah. So things had gone really well for me in Argentina with the bed and breakfast. It was not always easy for sure. It was a bit different than what I had imagined, but it was also the first time I did anything like that. But all in all, I was quite happy with how it was going. But then Brazil was the time I went to Brazil to open another business. And both businesses, by the way, I opened with an investor's visa. And that has certain requirements attached, right? So there's a deadline, there's all sorts of different minimum investment and all sorts of different things. Okay, so So that Brazil time was a completely different story, because I, again, for the second time, I bought a house. I had it built out. The build out already was a little bit bumpy. I had to change contractors, pay part of the build out twice because the first guy wasn't completely honest. And then, he just didn't do a good job either. So it was a bit, it was a bit difficult already there. But then it was finally finished. I had this beautiful green painted, majestic looking house in front of me with the nice facade and everything, in a huge patio. Everything was fresh paint on the wall a few days before the actual housewarming party or launch party, right? And I'd even invited samba singer Carla de Silva. She gave this as a gift to me. She was going to perform, and all of that was going great. And then I found out that my business partner for part of the business, whose name most of the business depended on, had actually committed fraud against me. And so we opened. I couldn't really call it off. It was too late. Everything was prepared. Everything was equipped. And then this big dream of mine that I had worked towards for more than a year, with a team already in place and everything, now all of a sudden totally collapsed in front of me, right? So I had poured into it all my savings, a year of renovations, lots of effort. I had put in so much of myself emotionally, and I truly did my best to try and keep it afloat, but the costs were too high. Business was slow without his name and his support. And then, just to make things even harder, Ben, the neighbors pushed back on the name I had chosen. And I wasn't really aware of this before. I should have really done more research on it, frankly, but it was a name of an African sea goddess. Why did I pick that name? Because we were close to the ocean. I love the ocean. I'm a Pisces in astrology. And I love that name. And plus, my name means queen, and that name also meant queen. So it was just the perfect fit. But they opposed it because of their religious beliefs, because most of them in that area were evangelicals, and it didn't sit well with them, to keep it short, right? So
Yeah.
I would find like weird stuff thrown into my pot here and whatnot. But it was just like, it was spooky and creepy, actually. Because also a little bit funny, actually, because they opposed all the African traditions, and also religious traditions. But they, on the other hand, they seem to use them against me, because these were actually practices, that were used in like black magic stuff, right? So anyway, but that just as a side. So it wasn't really an easy time for me. It was a really, really humbling and hard crash for me at the time. And it wasn't just about the money, Ben, that I had put into this, all my savings, because I had paid everything in cash, right? I didn't have credit.
Right. Yeah.
In-
Yeah.
I wouldn't have gotten a loan from a bank. So so I'd also lost a friend, or at least I thought he was a friend, right? And my my self-esteem, apart from the real estate, problem that, and there's more to the real estate part, but anyway, my self-esteem took a real hit, right?
Yeah.
So that was not the easiest time of my life.
So let's hold into that one. So the partner defrauded you. Was it the money, the cash flow that he was providing as far as that? But like, it sounded like you had the place, you could operate. So what
Right.
were the limitations then by this coming to light?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I didn't really go into detail about that. So there was a second project we had together, and we both put money into a bank account that we both had access to. Okay, for that. We signed an agreement for it. So it was all like, legally backed up, actually. And that second project didn't come about because it depended on a third business partner. And so when that happened, I realized that he had taken money from that account, and the biggest part of it, to buy himself a new car. So, yes, can you believe it? And, so I was so shocked. I was like in utter disbelief at the beginning. And so I try to talk to him and to work it out and say, hey, you know what, you can take a loan. He didn't want to do that because he didn't want to pay for the loan. It made no sense in my head, you know. It was very, very shocking to me. And of course, I had also paid for his business name because he was well known. This is going to be just to give you a better idea. I'm not going to name the name of the guy, but this was going to be a dance studio. So we would provide dance classes as well as wellness and yoga and Pilates classes, right? And wellness services, because I have studied a lot of holistic stuff that I could have used there. So it was all prepared and built out for both. And we had already, I had my team in place, right? So that's when that happened. And so, yes, his name was also outside. And yes, it was for the bigger part of the business. And the business truly depended on that name,
Wow.
or else it would have been just hard because of the competition in the city.
Man, that sounds challenging, and it's a rough experience.
Yeah.
What did it actually cost you? So now this is going to be the physical stuff. Let's talk about the money, and then what you went into more about the time, the emotions, things like that. Like, what was the cost of this?
So yeah, as you said, the cost is multiple. So first of all, the financial loss. Um, Everything I had bought, I had picked. I didn't have a huge budget left after having to pay for parts of the build out twice, right? So
Yeah.
I took a little bit of a loan actually with my family, my brother and my mom, and that was something that I had to pay back, and I eventually did. But anyway, so I had pulled all these materials together that you need: the furniture, the yoga mats, the whatnot, the Pilates equipment, because this was going to be Pilates with equipment, not the floor Pilates, right? So that cost quite a lot of money, and I had to quickly sell this off quite cheaply again because I really needed to get rid of it. But first of all, also the house, now all of a sudden, that property had a documentation problem then, meaning I could not pay, I could not sell for months and months. And I had to still pay for the
Mortgage relief.
electricity, for
Yeah.
water,
Oh,
for keeping it
wow.
open, basically, And this is very, very costly in Brazil, even if you don't use a lot of it, because they have you pay a minimum. And then there was corruption with the city. They sent me even an invoice that was not even true. I mean, there was so much going on. I could fill a whole book with only this story. But uh, this was all going on, right? So then I was waiting for this documentation problem that had not shown up when I was buying this place. And that now all of a sudden was there. I had to pay a lawyer to get this resolved. So eventually I could actually sell, okay, Ben, but still with everything that I had paid for the name. And yes, I did sue, but with all the time that went by until this finally was resolved, and the loss in currency over time, with the currency suffering, over those 2 years that it took, and the loss to get the money out in another country eventually, and all of that, I definitely lost about $100,000.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't even include all the time, right? Because I had to go back and forth. And I actually also loved Rio, and I really wanted to stay here, at least past time. But eventually I decided that didn't make any, financial sense. So yeah,
Wow.
that's what it all came to. And then, of course, the cost, as I said earlier, in self-esteem and confidence, which I
Yeah.
had built up very, very, with a lot of effort, because I was very shy as a kid. I did not have a lot of confidence when I was.
So how long did it take you to get back that to try another project and
Mhm.
things like that? Like what was the actual cost on that? Because that can some people it takes years to go back to, but what did you do to okay, overall, two questions. How have you resolved to not make those types of mistakes again? And
Yeah.
then how long did it take for you to do the next venture?
Yeah, maybe I'm going to actually start with the second part of the question first. So it took me some time to clean up the mess. Yes, I knew I couldn't stay stuck in victim mode to do that. So I had to take full responsibility. That was the first step. So I dismantled the business, sold everything, tied up every loose end and all of that. And it also was tied to my investor visa and so on. So yeah, it took me about a period of about 2 years. And eventually I also had to actually let go of the visa. During that time, I was already, not the first year right away, but the second year, I was already in the US, and had to go back and forth, travel costs as well.
Wow.
And I wanted to maintain my visa at first. So that's a whole other story. I eventually had to let go of the visa, dealing with corrupt immigration people. That was a drama in itself. But anyway, so I was already in New York, and I was still working also to close the business down, because if you ask people who've ever had a business, especially brick and mortar business in Brazil and in Rio, they will probably tell you that it's harder to close a business than to open a business there. So that I paid for that twice. Also, I still don't have proof that it was done. It's crazy.
Wow.
And yeah, so, and then I was already building the new undertaking in New York City, although it was quite, with the energy split between the two places. In the beginning, it was a bit slow, and I had to also figure out how could I bring all this eclectic experience of my past, the leadership experience, and all of that, together to something, a meaningful new project that made sense to potential clients,
Yeah.
but also would give me joy and fulfillment, and really allow me to have the impact I wanted to have. And that was going on in parallel for quite some time. So yeah. So, and because I never paid anyone off, because maybe one other element that is really important to me is integrity, that didn't make things easier,
Right.
but it really mattered to me to stay in my truth and in integrity. And then, so what steps did I take? Well, I mentioned some already, but really the first one was to step out of victim mode and into a more self-empowering mindset, to also forgive not just the guy, but myself, because that's the harder part for most people, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that took me quite some time, Ben, frankly. So that's a process, because we tend to resent ourselves the most. And we tend to think, oh, we should have known better, but we didn't know better, because we didn't have all the information then that we have
Yeah.
now,
How
right?
long ago was this situation?
So I moved to New York City end of 2011, beginning of 2012. So it was like a year before that, about a year. That is
2010 or so.
about
Okay.
right.
Now, have any other situations been business things where that they things don't, because not all you could do everything right and still things not go well. Have you had any business dealings not go to plan since then?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few business dealings that started out really great, and then somehow, not to that extent though,
Okay.
somehow
But
people are just not as committed, and
yep.
then they all of a sudden they think, oh, this is, I no longer want to do this or whatever, and they weren't really um, in integrity enough to even explain why
Right.
something in their lives changed,
Yeah.
very apparently, but uh, yeah, so blah blah blah, and now
Well,
it's all different.
But
So
because of that the experience in Brazil though, and you went through this, are you now able to more quickly forgive yourself, get over those types of things and whatnot? How have you learned from that process internally?
yes, absolutely. So I don't always only search for, oh, the fault in me. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me, right? Because we tend to then always believe, even subconsciously, oh, there must be something wrong with us. But there's not. It was just that one experience. And I'm also much more selective about partnerships. I do more due diligence for sure, even when I know people beforehand. And I know that partnering is always a choice, but it has to be a conscious one. And I've proven that I can succeed on my own. And if I do collaborate, it has to feel right on every level, you know. So most of all, I had to relearn also to trust my intuition. Back then, I believe I ignored it. I didn't listen to it because then it probably wouldn't have happened. But so that's also something. And sometimes it's hard to know what that intuition is, because our intuition is our voice of truth. It never lies, but we're not always able to hear it or
Right,
willing to
right.
listen to it, because when
Well,
something really bad, shiny object, right? It looks so great, and
and
then
things can logically make sense, and it's what you desired, but yet something's telling you it's not there, and that is a rub. It's like, well, am I supposed to show perseverance here, right? Or
yeah,
am I supposed to have discernment, right? So that's a tough one, and sometimes you only get to that point of knowing the difference by making that mistake, having that one time, and be like, oh, that's what that was. So,
right.
so
Absolutely. And I now don't necessarily search for my intuition as a voice anymore, but I if I if I think that I'm not able to discern that voice, then I look for lightness or heaviness.
I got you.
Sometimes
So
an easier way to really listen to our intuition, because a lot of people ask me, but how do I hear that voice? How do I distinguish it from other voices that I making noise in my head? So that's a way for me, at least. Yeah. And so, yeah. And also back then, I'd always done so many things by myself, learning by doing, as in Argentina. I didn't have any relevant experience for that either. And all of a sudden there was this person, and it seemed like it was going to be so much easier just by that person being there. So I put all my trust into that person instead
yeah,
of in me. And that is something I no longer need to do. I didn't need to do it ever.
yeah, I would go in two different ways. Like I've had my own business for the longest time, and I'm actually more open to partnerships now than ever before because
Mm,
I don't need to create my own things. However, I know because I've asked other people that have started mini businesses that have been successful. It comes down to a good operating agreement at the beginning to be able to know how you're going to handle problems and all that kind of stuff. Now, you can't ever handle what you don't see. Like if they're not of integrity and there's going to be fraud, those are things you're never going to see. But sometimes it's good to balance other people's strengths with that. So I would go both directions. I mean, I've been
right.
I guess, serial entrepreneur to some degree, but it just helps when I know that feeling you had. You felt, okay, I have somebody else to go through this with you, and I hate that's the case. That on this first attempt, you're like, oh, see, I need to be by myself, and I've used to be of that mindset until I've met folks that have had 7 businesses that have all been successful that were wildly different, but because of good operating agreements and good agreements in general, they've been well. Now, one thing I want to ask you, Regina. So, a lot of our audience are in the 20s, 30s, emerging leaders. Maybe not. They're employees in many cases. Um, how would you reframe this experience for you to help somebody in their career or learning to work with others? How can you take the lessons that you've learned, the cost that you've paid, and what you've gained from it now in your outlook? How would you position that to help someone early in their career in their 20s and 30s?
Yeah, so there are always those practical lessons that we learn from an experience on the one hand, and then there are the opportunities that we can take to upgrade our mindset, to also know ourselves better, because self-awareness is the basis for self-leadership, and that's what you need to be successful. And also, one so-called failure, you can just look at it as an experience. It doesn't determine your future. It's just an
Yep.
experience. It's
Yep.
an opportunity. It does not determine who you are. It doesn't put a value sign onto you. Sometimes when we take risks, then things happen, right? And
One of
it's
the
just normal. And the past is the past.
Well, that's why we like to distinguish between your identity as far as the behavior traits and roles you've had, right? Because you failure doesn't make you not the adventurous person, doesn't make you the not curious person. Now you realize maybe I should have been a little more curious. I mean, there's things that we learn about this, but when you know your identity, that is irregardless. That is regardless of any performance you have in any role you have, because we wear those hats of spouse, of parent, of child, of business partner. And sometimes we suck at those for that day or that week. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that our personality, our identity has changed because of that. And you're speaking our language, because in becoming a cohesive leader, it's the power up guide. And P is prepare your mindset. And so mindset is the first thing, is how you approach that. You're speaking to our audience, because that is where we go with too, is the mindset is failure is not fatal. It's simply an event or an experience, like you said, and you move on from it. So I love that.
Absolutely. Yes. And also, you don't have to know everything before you start something new, right? That's also really, really important, because we can learn so much by doing. We can grow into our next chapter, our next role, whether that's a business or whether it is a new job. If you already knew everything, then it wouldn't be new. So it
You're
wouldn't
gonna
be
enjoy. You're gonna enjoy how I close out the show later, just so when you hear that quote. So I love the mindset. So
cool.
this is great. Man, yeah. So letting folks know that you're gonna learn from it. It's not fatal. And if you're listening to this one, guys, go back and listen to some other podcasts, especially maybe even the first one we did with Ryan Cass. He owned up to his mistakes, and that actually propelled his career, because people are humans, and when you have leadership that knows that people are humans and mistakes happen, and then you own up to that and don't try to sweep it under the rug or put it in the closet, that's a big deal, because that shows the integrity, and that means when you have bigger responsibility, we know how you're going to handle it. So man, that's such a good lesson, Regina. Thank you.
Thank you.
So how would folks get a hold of you? So tell us a little bit more about your transformational coaching that you do, and how folks would follow you or get a hold of you at all.
Yeah, so I have a website called Transform Your Performance, like my company name, transformyourperformance.com. There's really everything else there. I believe there's a link to my podcast, Rise to Lead. There's a link to my books, which you also find on Amazon. And I'm mostly active in terms of social media on LinkedIn and YouTube, but you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook.
And so, listeners, it's Regina, Regina, Huber, Huber, and that's how you'll probably find her on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And that's exciting. Okay. Now, what is a question you thought I might ask that I did not ask?
No, didn't ask. Mm,
That,
what do you do when life gives you lemons?
nice. Yeah. And what would your response be?
Make a whiskey sour, or if you're in Brazil, make a caipirinha.
Oh, nice, nice. I heard recently, I actually looked it up to verify. Um, Lemons are a man-made fruit, so life didn't give it. We gave them to ourselves. Because there are no lemons in nature. So it's one of those genetic, it's crazy things. But I actually love that. There's a really cool song out now by Forrest Frank called Lemonade. But I love that. So, All right. Well, thank you for joining today. And I'm going to close out with how we close out all cohesion culture programs is you don't have to know everything. You just need to be teachable.